Good evening and welcome to the Scottish Family Party live stream. Tonight I've got a couple of friends joining. We have Niall Fraser.
Hello, nice to see you all tonight.
And we have Gareth Kirk as well. And Richard's away. He's apparently doing some boating. So we're manning the stream tonight. And so I think we're going to have a bit of a look at some of the things that have been happening in the news, which are relevant to kind of Scottish politics. And one of the things is there's a by-election, and this is important for us as the family party to be participating in by-elections. And the reason that this by-election has come up is because of Jordan Linden, who was an SNP councillor, but he was basically caught out for behaving sexually inappropriately with people within the party, particularly young members of the SNP. Perhaps similar to other things that we've seen in the news in this week. He admitted making advances to a teenager. This teenager felt uncomfortable and quit due to mental health reasons. So that sounds very similar to another story which is in the news this week. Him essentially losing his position has resulted in there being a by-election, and that's a real chance for us as a Scottish Family Party. Obviously, our values are very different to what's being presented by the SNP. Niall, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think out with the old and in with the new, and the old being the sort of creepy SNP lectures that frequent North Lanarkshire. But I mean, this Jordan Linden character in particular, really a nefarious case. He wasn't just a normal councillor; he was the leader of the council, and just prior to his sort of expose, there was lots of attempts to actually cover up his activity before. So there was a ring of protection that was thrown up around this Linden character, which is just unacceptable. But I love what you're saying there, Phil, about replacing this type of behaviour with someone with Scottish Family Party values is absolutely imperative. Absolutely imperative.
Gareth, have you followed this story at all?
I've not actually followed the story, but I can probably, I wouldn't say it's an isolated incident in terms of, I think if there have been a few candidates who have followed, and just people would highlight, would highlight some individual, some other MPs or as being highly dangerous. Just almost common knowledge. In terms of, which begs the question of how is it that they got there, and how is it that they just maintained there? And I think that's coming back to the ring of protection. And is that really, how does the community affect that or change that or highlight that as a problem? I'd love to see there being more action or more kind of like. Awareness and also self-governance. It should be highlighted from, if that behavior is being highlighted somewhere, surely it was detected elsewhere. Were there anyone else internally highlighted?
Interestingly, allegations go back to 2016, because this isn't the only high-profile position he had. He was the chairman of the Scottish Youth Parliament, and the allegations then included claims that when he was 21, he was sending lewd images to younger members. And so, those should be kind of, I guess, warning signs that something isn't quite right when you start to hear, these allegations made by, I'm guessing, people who are sort of on your side. These are people who are part of your party for a lot of these things, I would guess, and so they should be taken pretty seriously. And so kind of also in the news this week, you've seen Philip Schofield, You know, that he meets a boy, 15 years old, opens the door for him to become a runner on this morning. You know, so a hard industry to get into. A lot of people want to get into the television industry, and you know, he becomes this boy's mentor when he's a teenager, and then you have the you know, something similar happening here, where there's this relationship that happens, and you know, Philip says it was ill-advised and inappropriate, you know, basically, but not illegal. And what worries me is when we look at what's happening in schools, is it's preparing people to walk into these kind of relationships. You know, that I was looking through the sex education material for Scotland, and in one of the lessons, it says like a 2008 survey found that 44% of straight men have had anal sex. I can't.
I find that hard to believe.
I can't work that out. You know, that on the one hand, with conversion therapy, the LGBT lobby is saying there's absolutely no way that anyone can change their sexuality. You know, this is like, this amounts to torture. And then on the other hand, the material that they're presenting in schools is saying that you can still class yourself as straight while you're having anal sex.
Yeah.
You know, I don't really like understand that, you know. And so and I think from listening to like Eamon Holmes talking about what was going on, he seemed to say that, you know, that this young guy considered himself to be straight, you know. And so, you know, obviously there's a situation where there's somebody with tremendous power, ability to open doors. It seems like he was, you know, promoted, you know, with a degree of favoritism or something, or the doors were open in a way that they weren't for other people. And, you know, that I imagine there's tremendous pressure there to go along with somebody with such, you know, status and things like that. But that's going to be similar for anyone, you know, entering the workforce, that people want to get ahead in their careers. They want to, you know, do what they can to you know, further their careers and things like that. There's a lot of trust in these kind of mentoring positions and things like that. If you've got mentors and things at work, it's a very valuable thing to have. But when we see what people are being taught in schools, it seems to be opening them up to be abused. Even if this was, you know, if these people are above the age of consent where this is happening, you know, in both cases, we're seeing these boys saying basically they've got mental health issues that seem to, you know, emanate from what's happened, you know, with in these situations.
Yeah, so in both cases, they would be considered vulnerable people, either at the end or even during. I'd say that's one of the concerns. So a question maybe to follow. I think Niall, I thought you were going to raise your hand there earlier on the other thing, but I was wondering, maybe one question we could ask is, how do we defend ourselves from this? How do we prevent predatory people coming in, presenting themselves? I mean, he was the chair of the youth leader, you know, the SNP youth. You would think the biggest advocate for protection of the youth, but actually he was a predator. So,
Yes.
I would say these people exist regardless, and the question we need to ask ourselves, I guess, as well as highlight how this couldn't have happened or should have been prevented, and how do we apply the same things?
I think, I mean, people who are predators, they'll always make their way into positions where they can select victims and gather victims. I mean, the youth parliament in particular is probably where a lot of these predators would like to end up. And for people like Linda, I think there needs to be sort of disclosure forms and everything. We need to have more enhanced disclosures on who we're allowing near these sort of establishments. And we need more education for the kids themselves to identify when people are being abusive, or it's closing in on grooming, or you know, sort of lurid behaviour. We need to be able to identify that at an earlier stage, so that kids can identify and raise awareness and tell an adult sooner, rather than allowing it to continue. Um, and like you say, a lot of these kids don't know they're being abused until the actual things happened, and then it's the sort of the mental health and the issues that occur after the fact. So we need to identify it sooner, and put a stop to it sooner. There's no other way, really.
Yeah, I mean, so like looking through the sex education material in Scotland, and the guidance which has been given by the Scottish government, the age of consent is 16 in Scotland. However, when that's taught in Scottish schools, they do teach that, but then they teach the advice that's been given by the government that goes with that. It seems to completely set that aside. So this is what that advice says. It says, if you are 13, 14 or 15 and thinking about having sex, you might be worried about the law. If you are, don't think that a professional person will be forced to report you to the police. They won't be. If you're under the age of 13, the law says you are too young to give consent to any kind of sexual activity at all, like sexual touching or oral sex or vaginal sex or anal sex. It's very unusual for people aged 13, 14 or 15 to be prosecuted if both young people are happy and one young person is not forcing the other to have sex. And so here, like within the curriculum, they're basically saying, that between people, who are aged 13, 14 and 15, then consensual sex is okay, even though it's below the age of consent. And I was looking through a document that the UN has brought out, and that's, it seems that Scotland has already put into force pretty much what they're saying, although the UN's version of it doesn't specify this 13, 14 or 15 thing. It leaves it a lot more open than that. And this is what it reads. It says, with respect to the enforcement of criminal law, any prescribed minimum age of consent to sex must be applied in a non-discriminatory manner. Enforcement may not be linked to the sex, gender, or of participants, or age, or consent to marriage. Moreover, sexual conduct involving persons below the domestically prescribed minimum age of consent may be consensual in fact, if not in law. And so it's saying, even though the law is there, that basically you can't discriminate with the age of consent based on sexuality. So you can't have different age of consent for homosexual sex and heterosexual sex. But then they're saying, actually, even in the case that you're under the age of consent, you may have consented in fact, but not in law. It says, in this context, the enforcement of criminal law should reflect the rights and capacity of persons under 18 years of age to make decisions about engaging in consensual sexual conduct and their right to be heard in matters concerning them, pursuant to their evolving capacities and progressive autonomy, etc., etc. So it's basically saying you have to make a judgment on if the person who was under the age of consent knew what they were doing, basically. Had they consented with some sort of understanding? And if they had, you should bear in mind their thoughts as to whether you should actually apply the law or not. So it's saying, here's a law, and you might not want to apply it based on the circumstances. And that offers such little protection to young people, because, in the situation of, you've got somebody who's older who is being very kind and, providing lots of opportunity to a young person, and the person does consent, you know, and they may have done that completely willingly and regretted it afterwards, you know,
Yeah.
as seems to be the case in these two circumstances, that there seemed to be a willingness, but also regret. Well, in the first one, there was no willingness. There was somebody just saying, right, I'm leaving because you're pursuing me and I'm not liking that, you know. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's so very convoluted, this consensual in fact, but not in law. I mean, it's just trying to get you wrap your head around that. And it's for 13, 14, 15-year-olds who...
It doesn't say 13, 14, 15.
It's just adolescence.
It's almost
the
like any
terminology,
age.
isn't it? Yeah.
It's just
I
under
know
18, it says here.
the
Not-
UN like to use the word adolescence, which I think is anywhere between 10 and sort of 18. So again, I think it's a very murky area, and it's being specifically greyed or being specifically murky in order to create this sort of ambiguous fact in law, you know, consensual in fact but not in law. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't know if Gareth, you want to take that over, but to me it just doesn't make sense at all.
So what are the? I see the danger in that. So in terms of somebody might say, well, you did consent because you went over to so and so's house. You know, it does create a grey area now because it leaves it open almost to the lawmakers, i.e., the lawyers, to then manipulate and you know, create the situation and maybe convince a jury or a number of people that actually it was legitimate and was consensual. You know, it just becomes grey. Whereas I think if you had it in law, and it was simply the fact that, you know, under this number, under no circumstance. So the fact that the Scottish guidance goes and says, well, if both people are underage, then it seems to be you can get away with it. But actually, one of the comforts I have always had was this idea was it is under the law, under the age, and it's against the law. No one's going to be willing to even try. So as a parent, if something happens to my daughter, I can go and, oh, you're underage. Well, hell, you know, that's underage, full stop. So he knows what he was doing is illegal. She would know, you know, they may be consensual, but it's illegal. And therefore, there's this idea that it would be prevented in terms of the danger you have. And the real danger is the fact that people at a certain time can think, oh, this is what I want. They can be made to think that for this benefit, that benefit. And then later down the line, they realize, actually, you know what? That wasn't what I wanted. They made me want that. Yeah. It wasn't for me at all. I was just used. And that's what happens. You hear about people many years later thinking, I was in this thing, you know, looking back, you know, their influence is now subsided, and somebody's replaying the events and going, oh, you know what? Wow, I was just used. You know, they put me in that situation, and I was led down this road. They recognized that they were being led. Their opportunities were, hey, if you come to this party, if you do this, if you do that, if you hang around a little later, you know, the guidance might be, you know, looking back, they realized it was a very direct path of an intentionality, not just the way things were being unfolded. And that for me is my concern. Like I think the idea is that the spirit of the law, if I can put it that way, is for the protection of the children. That's why this is there. There were nobles way back when whoever thought that you know, maybe it was the case way back when it was quite normal to have very young partners or whatever it is, you know, with children being influenced from younger, and people going, actually, hang on, this is wrong. You know, somebody at some point would have put a moral limit and said, actually, we have to protect these people. Here's a law, and that law, this is the law. Under 16, that is the law. I'm interested that it's under 18 for the UN, and yet also just as vague, if not more vague. And yet, how is Scotland?
I mean, the UN's obviously speaking to all nations, and 18 just being not necessarily being age of consent, but being age of adulthood, I guess, worldwide, more or less. And we've got Donna Richmond, who said, people are now speaking up. The rats are running scared, trying to normalize abusing kids, you know. And
well said, Donna.
Yeah.
I really think I should on that point. I think that is like response number one. So often you hear, like in the last case where it took 6 months, she was being abused for 6 months before she eventually spoke up to her parents. This idea that schools are saying we're going to be the ones who can protect you. Don't speak to your parents. And even in the video, the video is, "Hey, my parents won't know." Where they do a video of your first time, and it's two kids. "No, is your mom here? No, my dad's not there. No, this secret thing." And I was like, "Wait a second. Are you encouraging children not to be open and have like good relationships with their parents?" I think that's problem number one. But this idea of being afraid to speak up, I think speaking up and being genuine in terms of, as soon as the first attempt happens, something needs to be spoken. You can't leave it until it gets to a point. Think, okay, well, it happened. I felt uncomfortable. I think it was a little bit weird. I maybe speak to a close friend. It needs, at that point, it needs to be addressed. Something needs to be highlighted. And the rat needs to get the awareness that, hey, you try anything and boom, there's something. There must be a much quicker response to that. Made me uncomfortable. I'm going to go tell somebody this dude's creepy. And you tell the senior, you make it aware, and it needs to be highlighted very quickly.
I think what Donna was saying was quite interesting, because I put her comment up because she's saying, like, there's a bit of fight back now about what's happening. We saw that in Denny, where we saw parents standing up there. And I think with GB News as well, we get a bit of, the other side being seen. And there's been some interesting things which have happened in the last week. So one was a speaker. I can't remember if it's Oxford or Cambridge. Oh, this was actually really interesting. I watched the film that came out of it. So there's a film which is about the demographics and the birth rate. And I think it was Cambridge that this was due to be shown at. And I think there's a separate issue happening at Oxford. I'm not sure these are two places where things have been cancelled. But it's a film that basically looks at the total fertility rate and how it's declining around the world. And I think it was due to be screened in Cambridge. I think it was in Cambridge. And then I think the feminists objected, having not seen the film. They said this is bound to be against feminism, and so we need to cancel this film. We need to, stop this being shown. And basically, the university ended up in the same position. It's basically the director was going to come, I think, and they were going to do a talk and things like that. And the university ended up saying, yeah, we're all for freedom of speech, but we don't think we can protect the safety of people, kind of thing. Mm. So, it was, I'm not sure if it went ahead or not. But I saw the organizer speaking on GB News, which is quite interesting. And she was actually somebody who was due to go through with like transgender surgery and had backed out of it. So it's quite interesting. I just thought, oh, this is an interesting speaker. She speaks really well. I'll listen. I'll look up what her perspective is. And she'd actually she'd been on before on the transgender issue, basically, and saying, I was on that production line for transgender kind of surgery. And I'm just so thankful that there were people that were not affirmative that kind of caused me to rethink. And I'm so glad I didn't do that, But then, yeah, the actual film was really interesting. Like for me, I would assume that one of the major drivers of the falling birth rate would be to do with feminism and things like that. But what was interesting in this film was that actually the person presenting it was saying, like, in some countries it might be, but in other countries it almost certainly isn't, And he went through different nations and said, this is we can't really get to the bottom of what's completely behind this, because, and there seems to be a different explanation in each nation, but it's only like sub-Saharan Africa that the birth rate is actually above the replacement rate, and and so actually for me watching the film, it was moving me to the direction of thinking like there are other reasons behind this other than like feminism and all of these kind of things. It's saying like here are some other reasons, like some economic reasons and things like that. And so it was actually moving me away from what my starting position might have been. But the feminists were still like, we need to cancel this. So that was kind of interesting. And then in Oxford, there's a gender critical, I assume feminist speaking, and she's being blocked from speaking. She is actually speaking tonight. I saw on Twitter just before going on that a trans activist had glued her hands to the floor to object to what was being said, basically. The person who glued their hands to the floor wasn't necessarily saying the event. Maybe they were saying the event would be cancelled, but they were saying that I also have the right to glue my hands to the floor. I think maybe it was quite convoluted.
Someone on the t-shirt saying, no trans genocide or something like that.
Yeah. So no more trans deaths, basically. So the argument being, we are not a discussion. And I think I saw the line basically that we shouldn't have to keep making the same argument to justify ourselves, kind of thing. And it's like, but I haven't really heard an argument yet. I haven't heard somebody, like even as like people like Matt Walsh would say, what is a woman when we apply these new definitions of like men and women and what they are? Can you explain, like how I know if I'm a woman or not, or what are the things that I do to work out, which gender I am, and so those basic questions haven't been answered, and there's like this fundamental, what I see as a truth that people are born male and female, that people have believed for thousands of years, and we're sort of expected to give that up without any argument or any debate. And I think the numbers are showing, that there's no increase in suicide for people getting gender affirming surgery and things like that. There's no increase or decrease either way, basically. Like there's no evidence that people's lives are being saved by this.
That topic is really interesting in terms of the argument. In fact, I would say it's almost the other way around. For example, anyone who is gender critical. So the difficulty there is the trans comes out of like the victimized mentality. We're the victims. And arguably they could very well have been in the past where there was law against gay communities, that you know what I mean, in terms of there was a lot more I would say complexity in terms of that's one of the things I'd love to put on a map now. The extreme right in terms of if like Russia, or I can't remember some of the places where you would get locked in jail, or your life or your stuff would be taken away, you'd be fined, or going to jail is pretty, or even killed. I'm not sure if that's even the case. In fact, you can see that from rioting and things as well, in terms of back in the day instances of that happening. But here, what I'm seeing now is anyone who speaks up. Anyone who says, "Oh, I think in that there is a male and female," that there's such a massive like their jobs are at risk. I know a number of people who have spoken against the saying, hey, well, gender critical or something, and they've lost their jobs on a regular basis. Like that seems to be the norm. There's definite fear. I heard generally fear. One example, live example, somebody who was going to be teaching on, teaching on, can't remember something, to do with DNA, and there was a pupil in the class who has 2 months, and so out of so they thought, oh, this might cause a problem for that child in terms of mums and dads. It doesn't have a dad, so it's going to be a complex discussion for that, a complex lesson. So called up the parent to describe this is going to happen. So you may want to preempt your child that there's going to be a discussion about DNA, male and female, all that kind of thing. And the child's going to think, oh well, where's the male element of my DNA? And so what responded was the parent was the one who was dictating what words can and cannot be used. Like this is how you're going to do the lesson. And I thought to myself, wow, that's really that's that shows how far we are in the spectrum. We're in the spectrum where normality is somewhere in the middle and center, left, and no, we're quite far where you speak against this thing and you can go to jail, and you can lose your job, and you can this hate speech thing is being used, and it is being used, and people are getting themselves are finding themselves in trouble. I mean, I think Rich has been banging on this drum for a while, and it is happening. Yeah. So I'd love to just highlight that they're no longer the victims. Gluing yourself on the desk is no. You're not the one losing your job. You're not the one getting.
Yeah, they're getting raised up.
Yeah, they're still being massively defended. They're the ones who are like, "Hey, come to this class. Oh, yay, we got a trans person as a this the one's being celebrated. They're the ones who are being. You're no longer the victim. I can tell you who the victims are."
I mean, I want to get back to what you're saying. This belief, the belief that there's just men and women. That was written in stone, not just 10, 15 years ago. And I mean written in stone. Like it was carved, and it's still carved into schools. There's a boys' entrance. There's a girls' entrance. You'll see them all Glasgow or Edinburgh. The old schools, we had separate entrances for schools for boys and girls. So, I mean, this isn't a belief. We sort of need to reframe the argument. I don't like this starting point where we're sort of debating the science between... the science is settled. We know there's only men and women, and that's just it. There are no other... known genders in the universe. They've all been created over the last 10 or 15 years. So I just don't accept the level playing field. We're not playing on the level playing field if we're not basing our argument right on a solid foundation of DNA, XY chromosomes, XX chromosomes. We can't possibly have a constructive argument until we agree the basics. So it's more than a belief; it's fact, it's knowledge. But this fact, knowledge, has been twisted and turned into a belief, and this is the sort of the terminology sort of debate that we're getting drawn into, is whether or not whose science is correct, and what's the belief and what is science. So I just don't think we shouldn't cede the argument to them on the basis that there is any justification that there is anything more than men and women. Other than that, because we're already lost the argument, if you see what I'm saying. Mm. So it's more than a belief, it's settled science. There's nothing we can do.
So as the family party, our reaction is that we promote family, that basically the vision that we have is, I guess that ancient ideal, boy meets girl, yeah. They get married, they have a family, their family grows up, they end up having grandkids, and the process repeats. And through that process of marriage and, families get joined together, and then you get this fabric created in society because there's this meshing together of all these families. The family relationships are the strongest kind of relationships that you get. They're often really difficult. The people that you love the most are also the ones that hurt you the most, that you can be hurt by, the most. It's difficult, marriage, kids, all these things. There's always tensions and those kind of things. But those relationships are strong, that we have other relationships with friends, which are great at the time, but there's often, few friendships that are lifelong. lifelong friends, even though you have this phrase "best friend forever." You know, rarely does it work out. People move away, or you know, you might fall out over something or something like that. You know, and you know, sometimes families don't work out, and it's a tragedy. You know, it really hurts. You know, I've heard it said in terms of homelessness, people working with homelessness, they say there's like almost no one on the streets, but for a broken relationship somewhere. I think they're speaking about the UK basically, or you know, developed nations and things like that, where there's provision of social care and things like that. That the thing that can keep people isolated is, you know, it can boil down to a relationship somewhere which has gone wrong, or you know, like a family relationship that's gone wrong. And so these things, like they mean a lot to us, and they're important to us. And we're kind of living in a society which says, you know, because these relationships almost can be painful, maybe it's better not even to get on, you know, get on the train with them, you know. So you can have sexual pleasure without having that baggage of a long-lasting relationship that kind of that goes with it. And so, you know, the Scottish Family Party is there to promote family, to promote marriage, and to say that when we have strong families and when we have legislation that kind of supports families, doesn't work against them, then we think that Scotland will be a stronger nation. And that includes what's taught in schools and things like that. We don't think trans ideology should be taught in schools. We think the sex education which is taught in schools is too explicit. We're not against sex education in the right place, you know. But teaching primary school children how to have sex is completely inappropriate.
It's a step too far.
Yeah.
A step too far, of course. And of course, it sets them up for this grooming or the sexual abuse later on as well. And at the same time, it wouldn't be that bad if they were teaching them, these are the signs to watch out for. These are the stranger danger stuff. But it's not. It's not that anymore. I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying, Phil, about just being for the family and why that's so important. I mean, having strong family bonds in a family situation for children growing up is pivotal to their future success in life. I was doing these spaces the other night, and a lot of these drug deaths, I think 60 to 70% of them have ACE scores. Which is an ACE score is an adverse childhood experience. So a lot of these bad experiences in childhood can lead to and do lead to addiction issues in the future. So I mean, if we need to foster the best place for children to grow up and to have a great childhood, I know it's almost like Nicola Sturgeon saying, "Well, we make the best place for children to grow up in Scotland, and then create the worst place." For a child to grow up in Scotland. Well, we actually want to make it the best place for a child to grow up, and to maintain their innocence up until the appropriate time. You know, I think that's really important.
Yeah. And so one of the things, like, you know, the sun's started to come out now. It's a bit warmer, so the family party is kind of out and about. And so this is some of the things that have been happening recently, you know, up and down the country, at kind of, you know, street corners and at, you know, county fairs and things like that. The Scottish Family Party is getting about. We've got our flags and things, and, you know, just setting out the stalls and telling people, you know, about the Scottish Family Party. One of the interesting bits of feedback that Richard's been given is that when he's been at these things, that in some of these more rural areas, that people haven't heard of the Scottish Family Party. You know, that when in the cities, I think people do know that we exist, but there's probably a lot of people that, you know, our message resonates with, which just didn't know that we're there. And so, you know, it's the month of June and all the pride flags will be getting out there. But if you want to be out there saying what you stand for, that you stand for the family, then, you know, be in touch with your branch. If you're part of a branch, then say, can we get out? Can we get a table out? Can we get some flags out? Can we be standing for the family? And I think as people are seeing what's happening on the news and they're seeing all these stories bubbling up, I think like that comment we saw earlier is that people are beginning to speak out. People are beginning to say enough is enough. And I think the thing with pride is that because pride is just a word, it doesn't come with a manifesto. It doesn't say this is what we will believe forever going onwards. That the transgender part of pride 10 years ago was not a big part of it, but it's now the very cutting edge of the forefront of what pride is about, and that you can't have the LGB without the T, and so there's a solidarity in that, and we're seeing that basically within the conversion therapy stuff, basically saying, all or nothing. We definitely don't want a law which is saying, just that that persuading somebody to be in a heterosexual relationship is wrong. It has to say that anybody who tries to persuade somebody not to have a transgender identity, that kind of amounts to torture, and so these things are basically being lumped together, and that there are people within the gay community which is saying absolutely this doesn't represent me, and that was like interesting for me, like in a tech job. In one job, huge number of people in the company I was in were had gay identities basically, and they were not into like council culture or anything like that. They all said, one of them said like, "Oh, are you going to the Pride March?" And I said, "No, I hate it." Oh dear me, just because I'm gay doesn't mean I want to have rainbows everywhere. I just wanted like people to see that I'm basically a normal person, and that all the things that go with it are basically my private life, just as they would be for somebody who's heterosexual. That would be their private life, and I don't see the need to shout about these things, basically. And that was the view that they were having. One of the people said that they were against gay marriage. And I think at that time Stonewall wasn't even, for gay marriage. And so what's being asked for each year is very different, so that we've gone from a position where Stonewall was even arguing for gay marriage to a position where if like Christians aren't standing for gay marriage, then, they shouldn't be allowed in the country to speak or something like that, or that they must be thrown out of any pub that they go to, or any meeting they have should be closed down, or any theatre they're in should be shut, and those kind of things, And so this idea that pride stands for something fixed, I think is wrong. It's a moving goalpost, and people are starting to stand up and say, actually, enough is enough, and we've seen that with, I think, the Bud Light stuff in the United States. We've seen the shelves of Bud Light that basically they're trying to give it away now. Like it costs $15 and you get a $15 voucher.
It's so funny.
The shelves are still full because they tried to use a transgender influencer
and
to
then
say,
they've kicked up a new sponsorship deal with Harley Davidson motorcycles in order to sort of recoup some of the losses they've made during this less than expert level marketing exercise. I thought it was really
it's like Lemmings, stuff. like Target in the States has gone and done the same thing, and they hired a British designer to design their like LGBT range, and he's got a personal collection of stuff he's made, of which his most popular stuff is like satanic in nature. And it basically says, you know, that Satan welcomes transgender people, you know, so Satan loves transgender people. You know, I think that basically
one of the satanic deities is actually transgender himself, or they're in between. They're sort of I don't know what you call it when they've got both male and female genital. Androgynous is the word. So it has got quite a tie with the satanic stuff, the transgenderism.
Yeah, so it's like the
Linda's,
Baphomet stuff. That's what he argues, basically. Like he's saying, you know, that this is more in keeping with, so, you know, it's kind of satanic stuff in his personal collection, which he sells on his own website and things like that, which became popular, I think. And then Target contacted him to produce their range, and so these, you know, with Pride Month coming up, they've gone up in the front of the stores in Target, and basically people have looked at this designer's website and gone, actually, he's kind of promoting satanic stuff. So, you know, like the Christians there are like, no, let's boycott this. And you know, now they're seeing like their sales not doing so well, and I think their share price going down and things like that. Disney seems to be having flop after flop after flop with its films, which are following a kind of a woke agenda. And it used to be that always the critics would give these things a high score, and then the audience score would be really low. But now now even the critics are giving them less than like 50%. They're saying like, you know, it's done. we
I'd support that.
We can't in any way, like Indiana Jones and the Little Mermaid, like the critics are both saying like, you know, we appreciate it's kind of feminist and it's kind of,
it's only
it's just,
so much
you've lost
rainbows,
it, you know,
that you can be force fed before you start chucking them up and being sick. You know, I think there's over the last, especially 5 to 6 years, we've been absolutely covered in rainbows every June. You know, we're suffocating on rainbows at this point in Scotland. You know, just a breather would be nice. But again, it's I love what you said there, Phil, about it being a constantly moving thing. It's Pride. What does it represent? Nobody knows.
I think
it's constantly evolving. It's almost like the Black Lives Matter movement, where it just doesn't know how to be itself.
I think what I'd say within the Pride movement, you know, is that it's very different to necessarily like gay people that you'd meet. You know, that it's lots of the people which are massively for the Pride movement are not gay, and lots of people that are gay say, I don't like the Pride movement. I don't really want to be associated with it. And to really actually see that movement as what it is, a political movement, basically, with a whole bunch of political goals, which, you know, some of them do tie into LGBT and some of them, you know, don't really, you know. And I think in terms of like the sex education material that you see, there's lots of like LGBT stuff that as a family party we wouldn't like, which is being taught to young people. But by the same token, the heterosexual stuff which has come in with that is equally abhorrent. Yeah. You know, they basically they're promoting sexual practices in a heterosexual context, which, you know, really have no place in schools. Yes. It has nothing to do with education. It's really about, you know, I guess promoting a value system, which is basically saying that sex is for pleasure and has very little at all to do with procreation, very little at all to do with family, and the less strings attached to it, the better, rather than seeing it as something which, you know, finds its context, its best context within building a family, you know, where I guess the addictive properties of sex become something which is positive because it holds two people together, and if those two people are held together as children grow up and as they have grandchildren and those kind of things, then you're starting to see that fabric in society, you know.
What a great comments coming in there, Phil. Teenagers
Yeah.
with friends do not get involved in Pride now. The school texted me last year, don't wear the colour. They do not reply to my response. So what a great comments. We're reading them all diligently. Curry Muncher has got the same thoughts about this Dylan Mulvaney character as I think he speaks for a lot. He'll say he's grifted to perfection. This is this guy who has taken Bud Light for as much money as he humanly could.
Yeah.
And just ruined their brand at the same time. But, you know, such is life. I mean, for the life of me, I don't know why. Is this the new advertising campaign of the 2023 era or the 2024? Is this the make as much controversy as possible? It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. I mean, everyone knows Bud Light now. It'll be hard to get that name taken away. And likewise, everyone will know Target, like you're saying, Phil. So I think, is it this new, the marketing thing is just, it doesn't matter if it's really positive or really negative. Just do it. Just do it and get as much clicks as possible.
I was thinking of an interesting sort of comedy sketch. I don't know if any of you've seen the Babylon Bee, but you know, maybe like a sketch for them that basically after they kind of apologize for the Dylan Mulvaney thing, kind of half-hearted apology. Then some gay bars basically stop stocking Bud Light as well.
Yeah.
So I was thinking you could have a, you know, there are lots of like clips on YouTube of cases of Bud Light being destroyed. And I was thinking you could have like a transgender person who's like destroying some Bud Light, and you could have like a Christian who's doing it. And like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm destroying some Bud Light. Oh, what are you doing? I'm doing it. Oh, and then you have them come together in their united hatred of Bud Light and making friends. You know? Oh, we have so much in common. You know?
Dear.
Yeah.
It's interesting on the so this there was, you know, I was doing I sent an email to our local school because my children are not yet at the age where it's getting to the interesting bits around trans identity and all that kind of thing. But it was really interesting, you know, besides the fact that they don't have the positive nature of family in there as well. The one thing I was very much aware is they don't seem to highlight any risk of some of the behaviors. Like, for example, in the they list all the kind of like sexual diseases, and and they were like, oh, this one gets where you know, well, what's the impact of this one? Can take medicine. And they were like, HIV or can take medicine. You can have a perfectly healthy life.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
Yeah.
And I was like, what did you just say? Like, I come from Africa. I was like, what?
Yeah.
That's the thing in this UN document as well, is basically it's saying that you shouldn't be able to force somebody to, or even pressure somebody into revealing their HIV status.
Which is completely wrong, right?
And that's
you
in terms
knowingly
of like a
pass that
relationship or
on.
something. It's not like a legal, they're not saying, you know, it's basically saying that they, you know, because there are drugs that can suppress HIV to the point that you shouldn't be able to pass it on, then, you know, it should be considered coercive to basically try and make somebody reveal what their status is in the context, I think, of a relationship. They basically say,
but
you know,
but I was like, that doesn't even do that doesn't scratch the surface to the fact that you have to live on this medication. It costs 30 to like, I think it was 120,000, depending on how soon you get it in your life. It costs $30,000 to $120,000 in a lifetime for an individual to actually go through all that, you know, to maintain the course. But actually, what about that probably only works for those people who can take the meds. Surely there's circumstances where people can't. And if you look at that projection of like a body without immune system, that is such you can't at all hide from the severity of that risk. And I was like, it didn't feature at all in that education at all. It doesn't seem like a rational kind of like, hey, we'll tell you all the possible ways of having sex. I don't think they're all equal. I don't think just because you can, it should be called sex. I don't think.
And all the STDs are therefore equal as well, Gareth, right? This is what you're saying.
Exactly. They say that legally, in the legal terms, all forms of sex, including this, and anal sex, therefore we're going to label it all as sex. I was like, no, actually, they're very different things.
Yes.
Very, very different things. Like all of them, but the normal one's going to have side effects of some sort of nature. You know what I mean? There are just consequences.
Yes.
None of that features, and I thought to myself, wow, like you guys really are doing a disservice. You're literally covering over like the risk. Like if you're doing one, you need to at least do the other. But it was interesting. I spent ages laboring over this email, which got no response, no reply. I think it probably is something just no one can reply to. But it was yeah. So I definitely think that maybe we need some more advertising campaigns around the risks of some of these things.
Yeah.
Do our
I
own.
think you're absolutely right, Gareth.
Yeah, well, I think we're getting to the end now, but it's been good to talk to both of you tonight.
Yeah, no, it's been great.
Yeah.
I was just reading all the comments very diligently. Linda Ross, yes, I'm going to get the WD-40 and fix this squeaky cherry of mine. It's been too long. Curry Muncher's been quite great tonight as well. I mean, he sort of followed on for what I was talking about with the shock culture, the controversial culture that we're living in now with this Mizzy guy. Don't know if you've seen him on TikTok, one of these TikTok pranksters, but it's basically a shock artist. We maybe have to coin a term and call it shock artistry. But I mean, this is sort of how you make the headlines now. Stunts, shocking people into oblivion, where it's making people angry, making people happy. You're hopefully got both of those in one idea, so that you've got clicks for the good, clicks for the bad, and then if your video gets X amount of views, it's a terrible, terrible way of living, because especially when the kids are then being sort of taught, this is how you be successful. Go out and prank people and look like an idiot, It's no great. But yeah, thanks for having me, Phil. It's been a great chat, especially in terms of the Jordan Lind and the Schofield situation as well.
Yeah, good to chat to both of you. Thanks for joining us tonight, and tune in next week. I'm not sure what we have. So bye from me and Gareth and Niall. I'm going to try and run the outro here.
See you later.